Welcome back, class 10. Continuing with your history class. Today we will discuss the causes of the failure of the First War of Independence. So by the end of 1858, the war was over. It started around 1857, as we know that the First War of Independence, 1857. So by the end of 1858, the war was over. One by one, all the leaders and able commanders, they passed away, they died. There were many causes responsible for the failure. There were many causes which were responsible for the failure. Number one was lack of coordination among the leaders. There was no coordination. No one, each leader had their own goal, own mindset, and they had their own objective why they were against the Britishers. As we have mentioned, the action was supposed to begin on 31st May 1857, but the May 10 incident at Meerut disturbed the whole plan. No serious effort was made to relieve the siege of Delhi by Nana Sahib or any other leader. Second point was there was a lack of effective leadership. Rani Lakshmibai, Tatia Top or Kunwar Singh no doubt attained notable victories. They all attained victories, but their activities were confined to a very narrow area and extended over a brief period. So they had their victory or their whatever they have attained or achieved were very narrow. It was not very widespread, or they were not very, encompassing the whole India. It was restricted to their area of operation only. And it was for a very short period, very brief period. So on the other hand, the British were very ably prompted leaders like Lawrence, Havelock, Nicholson and Campbell. So one should understand that the Indians were fighting against the imperial power, British power, which was a very well-known power, well-organized power and very powerful. So, on the contrary, there were small pockets in India where some leaders were there, though they shone for a brief period and they went off. So, there was not consistently, not a single leader was able to fight against the British Raj. No consistency was there. They came like all of a sudden the leaders appeared. They fought their respective wars, and then they died. Either they were killed or they were dead. Superior equipment and resources of the British. Obviously, the Britishers had superior system. They had superior equipment. Military equipment of the Indians were inferior. For example, old muzzle loaders were outraged by the newly invented breech loaders of the British troops. Moreover, the Britishers had the far-reaching effects of the telegraph system. They could pour men and material into places where they needed. So these things, this whole organization power, this whole system of strategy which the Britishers had, obviously the Indians did not have. The war was localized. Many parts of India were not affected by the uprising at all. So the uprising were very localized. It was not pan-India basis. It was not all over India. For example, Punjab remained absolutely quiet. Indian rulers like Sindhia and Nizam of Hyderabad stood by the side of British. Even Sindh, Rajasthan and Bengal remained unaffected. So there are a lot of places in India which were totally unaffected by the First War of Independence. And fifth point was no scheme of a national state. This is very important. The rulers of the Indian states had no idea of a national state for all India. They did not want, they did not unitedly want that they should get rid of the Britishers. And their main motive was not to get rid of the Britishers and make India independent. Their main motive was to solve their localized or their personal problems. The rulers of Indian state had no idea of a national state for all India. Independence was meant only for the ruling chiefs, and there was no freedom for common people in it. So these were the causes of the failure of the First War of Independence. Now, results and consequences. Although the war did not result in Indian independence, but it did not leave India unaffected. Some important results of the war were: number one, end of company's rule and changes introduced in the administrative setup. Now, what happened was the war ended the East India Company's rule. The British statesmen realized that it was unwise to leave the government of such a vast country in the hands of a private trading company, because East India Company was a private trading company. So the British statesmen, or the British people, or the British ministers, they understood, or they realized that to rule India, it was not wise to give the responsibility to rule India in the hands of a private limited company or a private trading company. So accordingly, an act for the better government of India was passed on 2nd August 1858. So a rule was passed, and the name of the rule was Act for the Better Government of India. According to this act, it transferred the government of India from company to the crown. The responsibility of ruling India was transferred from the East Indian Company to the crown of Her Majesty. So India was now to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. Secondly, company's board of control and the court of directors were abolished. All the powers were transferred to the cabinet minister, known as the Secretary of State. These are very important points. Thirdly, the Secretary of State was to be assisted by the India Council, consisting of 15 members, 1-5, and his salary and allowances were to be paid out of the revenues or taxes which the Indian people gave. Fourthly, appointment to a civil service were to be made by open competition under the rules made by the Secretary of State in Council. So appointments to the civil service were made open under competition, the competitive examination. And lastly, the Governor General received the additional title of Viceroy. So the new title donated the new position of the Governor General as the representative of the Crown. So from that moment, the Governor General will be known as the Viceroy. So these were basically 5 points which were under the Act for the Better Government of India. Now, what other major changes or results were there? Number 2 was policy towards Indian princes and chiefs. Queen Victoria declared in her proclamation in 1858 that the British government would not annex the Indian states. All the treaties that the princes had concluded with the company would be honored. The rights of adoption and succession were also recognized. At the same time, they could have only a limited number of troops. Although the British people were recognizing the rights and successions of the Indian princes and recognizing and honoring the treaties, but the Indian princes could keep only a number of troops. Since Nana Sahib had taken an active part in the war and had fled into the jungles of Nepal, never to return again, the office of Peshwa was abolished because there was no king. With the death of Bahadur Shah, who was deported to Rangoon, now Burma, the Mughal imperial dynasty founded by Babur came to an end. So with Bahadur Shah Zafar going to Rangoon and never coming back, sent to Rangoon and never coming back. The Mughal dynasty came to an end. And Nana Sahib, he ran away to the jungles of Nepal and he never came back. So the office of Peshwa or the kingdom of Peshwa is also abolished. Third was reorganization of the army. So the policy of balance and counter check, very important, policy of balance and counter check was adopted regarding the military administration. What does it mean? It means that all proportion of the British East India soldiers were increased. Artillery and other effective weapons of warfare were reserved for the British troops in India. All key positions, main positions in the army were reserved exclusively for the British. Now, solemn promises made by the people of India, made to the people of India by Queen Victoria. So what did Queen Victoria promise? Queen Victoria, in her proclamation of 1858, promised not to interfere with the religious beliefs of the people of India, number one. Number two, the Queen also promised equal treatment to all her subjects, Indians and Europeans. All appointments, declared the Queen, would be strictly on the basis of education, ability, and integrity. Number three, an official pardon was granted to all the people excepting such persons as had been guilty for the murder of British people or British subjects. The proclamation ended with a promise that the material and moral advancement of the people would henceforth be the main concern of the government. Now, according to the Queen Victoria's proclamation, the Queen promised that the Queen, that means the Britishers, under the Crown, will not interfere into the religious beliefs of the people. The Queen promised that equal treatment will be given to the both European and the Indian people. A pardon was granted, official pardon was granted to the Indian people, except to those people who killed or murdered the British people. Proclamation ended that with the promise that material and moral mental advancement of the people would be the main concern of the government. These solemn promises, however, were not intended to be kept. Obviously, these promises were not kept. Policy of non-intervention in social religious matters were apparently fair and just, obviously. When the Britishers said that they will not interfere into our religious beliefs, it was fair, it was good, but it had its drawbacks too. How? During the pre-war period, before the war, a number of measures had been taken to reform the society. For example, in 1829, Lord William Bentinck issued a regulation declaring sati was illegal. Hindu Widow Remarriage Act of 1856 provided that any widow might marry again with the usual ceremonies. So after Queen's proclamation, country's progress was impeded, means slowed down or stopped, and the conservative elements gained ground. So before 1857, a lot of social reformers were trying to reform the Indian society and work against the ill of the Indian society. But with the promise of the Queen not interfering with our social and religious policies, it hindered the progress of Indian society. Next point is the policy of divide and rule. Very, very famous policy of the Britishers. The British policy was to pacify the chief and the princes of the native states. They were being converted into loyal supporters of the British Raj. This was done to create a wall of separation between the princes and the ordinary masses of the land. Further, the strength of the uprising lay in the Hindu-Muslim unity. So the Britishers realized that whatever the first war of independence have done, it was basically due to the Hindus and the Muslims. They were friends, they were united. So united we stand, divided we fall. So the Britishers very cleverly started dividing the loyalty among the Britishers, among the Muslims and the Hindus. The principal leaders, Nana Sahib, Tatia Top and others, recognized Bahadur Shah, a Muslim, as the emperor. Both Hindus and Muslims has combined against the hated foreigners. The British viewed this development of combination of Hindus and Muslims with alarm. Therefore, they tried to create misunderstanding between the Muslims and the Hindus. So soon after the First War of Independence, the British turned against the Muslim. At a later stage, however, growing nationalisms of the Hindus made them unfriendly in the eyes of the British. The Muslims were taken back into confidence. The consequences of the policy of divide and rule was that the princes turned against their own people and a rift between the Hindus and the Muslims. Rift means separation. So, then, next point is, next result or consequences of the war was economic exploitation. Now, India now became the field of economic exploitation, not of a single trading concern, but the entire British people. So the number of Englishmen in India, both private individuals and members of the service, increased. So the salary and allowances of the Secretary of State, civil servants, military officers were a large drain of the country resources. From the country, the Britishers were paid. India became a dumping ground of good manufactures in England. There was a rapid rise in the indebtedness of peasants under the British rule because the peasant had to take money loan to pay the Britishers in the form of taxes. The Britishers invested their surplus capital, which is extra capital in India, in railway, coal mines, jute mills and shipping. The Indians had to pay heavy interest and dividends on the capital invested in India. And the last point was, after the War of Independence, there was a rise of nationalism in India. The British soldiers were guilty of the most inhuman atrocities, means tortures. Okay. Popular songs in the praise of Tatia Tope and Rani of Jhansi and others kept the memory of the heroic deeds alive. So war became a symbol of challenge to the mighty British power in India. It inspired the Indians in the struggle against the British Raj. So it was a source of inspiration for the British people. So with this, we come to the end of the first chapter, the First War of Independence, 1857. So basically, what type of questions are generally asked in your ICSE? The thing is, if you go back and see all the causes, political causes, religious causes, socio-religious causes, economic causes known as economic exploitation, and military causes, all the points you have to know, because they might ask you, what do you mean by the doctrine of love? Because if they ask you this question, it comes under the political causes. If they ask you, what was the discourtesy shown to the Mughal emperor? It comes under the political causes. If they ask you, how did the introduction of railway and just give me a minute. Yes. What was the people's reaction to the introduction of railways in the mid-1850s? So it comes under the point introduction of railways and telegraphs under the social and religious causes. So what I'm trying to tell you is that all the points, all the causes you have to memorize, you have to know, you have to learn. And all the points under those causes you have to learn, because they might ask you, mention any three social or religious causes, then you can mention any three. Or they can ask you from the points inside those causes. When was the Widow Remarriage Act passed? And mention any two laws that interfered with the religious and social customs of the people. So like this you have to study. Then you have to memorize, or you have to know the causes of the failure and the results and the consequences of the war. The act of the better government of India, you have to know. You have to know what was the policy of the Indian princes and chiefs, policy towards them. Queen Victoria's proclamation, very important. What do you understand by the policy of divide and rule, economic exploitation, and how did the First War of Independence help in rising the feel, or rising inside the Indians the feeling of nationalism. So like this, if you study, You will understand, and you will be able to answer all the questions which will be asked in your examination. That is all for today. Thank you.